They would escort it to a cliff and make sure that it went over the edge. There is no book in the Old Testament that does not have either a prophecy or a foreshadowing of the story of Jesus. New Year's resolution, I'm going to start in Genesis. Don't start there. This is lifting weights. I'm not enjoying it at all. I'm just going to get through it.
I feel like reading something like the Gospels per se is pretty easy to see Jesus, obviously.
Since he's in them
Right,
physically,
yeah,
it's kind of, yeah.
But when you're reading something like Numbers or Deuteronomy, how do you see Jesus in that, or see the character of God, since that's, what I'm trying to do when I'm reading? How do I see the character of God in Numbers, or something that's a little more dense and tends to be more boring to the human mind?
Sure. So that's a great question. How do I see God in a book like Numbers, which is mostly an accounting ledger? Now, for those of you who are accounting nerds, we're all praying for you. But, but here's the thing is, actually, you can see Jesus in the book of Numbers, not just in that, but in multiple places. There is a foreshadowing in every single book of the Bible about Jesus. That's really, really cool. There is no book in the Old Testament that does not have either a prophecy or a foreshadowing of the story of Jesus. And so that's really, really amazing. So one of the things I'm going to tell somebody is, if you are new to having a daily discipline of reading Scripture, don't start at the beginning. Where do people start most of the time? New Year's resolution, I'm going to start in Genesis, which works for a minute because Genesis is a little cool and there's some really cool stories at the beginning of that. Halfway through, or about a quarter of the way through, you might be like, okay, that's a lot of names. And Exodus is kind of like that. And then you get halfway through Exodus and you're reading for the next 2.5 books, you're reading law. Literally, it's called the law. You're reading a legal treatise, basically. And at the very end of it, at Deuteronomy, you're reading a review of the legal treatise. Like, don't start there. I tell people all the time, start in Matthew and go forward till the end. And then once you get to the end of that, then go back to Genesis and start. Don't ignore the Old Testament, but get a little foundation and a little momentum underneath of you before you go try and tackle the books that are like 50 chapters long and are legal treatises. It's also easier to do this. Read the books with Jesus in them, because then when you read the books where Jesus isn't physically present, you'll be able to understand what you're looking for. I've seen Jesus in the flesh. Now I can see his heart in the other things. When you look in the book of Numbers specifically, it's really looking in the narratives that are there and in the sacrificial systems that are there in the book of Numbers and in the accounting that is there in the book of Numbers. We see little nuggets of things that point towards Jesus. We see nuggets of things that point towards God's plan. We see nuggets of things that kind of reveal. I'm just going to turn back to Numbers for a second. I want you to catch this. In verse 6 in chapter 4 of Numbers, then they shall put on it a covering of goat skin and spread on top of that a cloth of all blue and shall put in its poles. Now, okay, I don't see Jesus there right off the bat, right? Well, now hold on a second. They are clothing the Ark of the Covenant. Now, what is the Ark of the Covenant? It's the mercy seat of God. It's where the judgment of God was forestalled year after year after year on the Day of Atonement. The high priest would go in and offer the sacrifice for all the sins of the people. But every single one of those sacrifices, year after year after year, was pointing to the crucifixion of Jesus, the ultimate sacrifice for all sin of all time for all the world. One of the things that we get to tell the story of, and I've told that story here before, is the idea of the scapegoat. During this time of atonement, what they would do is they would take a red ribbon and tie it around a goat, and they would take a lamb and offer this lamb as a sacrifice. Well, the red ribbon tied around the goat represented the people's sin of that village. And then they would take the goat to the edge of the village, like where there was a cliff, escort the goat out, because you didn't want that goat wandering back into the village with the sin around its neck, right? They would escort it to a cliff and make sure that it went over the edge. The goat would literally take that sin and die. When Jesus is rejected in his hometown, what are they doing? They are taking him and they are taking him to the edge of the cliff and getting ready to throw him off like a goat. Come back to the Ark of the Covenant and understand that the Ark of the Covenant was clothed in a goat's skin. It's very much the same story. It looks a little different, but as we begin to understand those stories for Jesus, we begin to see them in the Old Testament. It's covered in that blue cloth, right? That blue cloth was a sign of the kingship before there was ever even a king. Jesus is the king. and the scapegoat and the lamb and the Ark of the Covenant. Better way to say it is the Ark of the Covenant is actually a physical representation of Jesus to come, the mercy seat of God that was to come, where all sins would be forgiven. And literally, I just turned back to Numbers and went, here's a note. I'll be honest with you, the first several times I read through Scripture and read through the sacrificial systems, I was like, this is lifting weights. I'm not enjoying it at all. I'm just going to get through it. And it was about the third or fourth time through as I was reading in what I call a read around. My read around looks like this. I start in Matthew and I go all the way around. And then I start in Matthew and I go all the way around. And like I said, it was probably a third or fourth time through. And all of a sudden I started seeing the sacrificial things that were there and understanding how Jesus was fulfilling every single one of them. And so I saw Jesus being the fulfillment of all of the sacrifices and I went, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before, or at least not with this kind of clarity before. And that's just one book. But the truth is I can see that in all of those things. We just recently studied Esther, where the name of God isn't mentioned at all, but I can still see Jesus active in that process because he is actually setting up things to come. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Next question.